extremely excited about today's program, and I'm honored to host it with my co-founder, Ann Vahalan, and Julie Trebolt, the Managing Director of Artist at Risk Connection. ARC is an organization that safeguards the right to artistic freedom of expression and ensures that artists and cultural professionals everywhere can live and work without fear. This is our second collaboration with ARC, who have proven to be an immensely important partner in our desire to create platforms for artists to be seen as thought leaders envisioning a new future. Dangerous art, endangered artists. You may ask what art is dangerous, but it turns out that all over the world, art is increasingly deemed dangerous, if not for the artists who made it, for the viewers who see it. Increasingly, institutions and authority figures, both state and non-state, deem art too dangerous, too volatile to be tolerated either by them or by the public. That's why we decided to devote this year to the Dangerous Art, Endangered Artists campaign. I want to thank the Independent New York, Elizabeth D., and the entire team, Emily, of Independent. This is a special kind of art fair that we think to host panels like this. I also want to thank Valentine Sargent, Communications Director, an editorial assistant at ARC, who has been invaluable in us pulling all of this together. Art at a time like this, thanks the New York State Council on the Arts, the Glenn Mead Trust Company, and the Kettering Family Foundation for support of Dangerous Art, Endangered Artists campaign. We have programs distributed throughout the room that includes not only today's events, but the Dangerous Art Summit that we're having in June, 2 days in June, at Brick on Fulton Street in Brooklyn. Now I'd like to introduce our panel, Don't Delete Art, and it will be moderated by Emma Shapiro. Emma Shapiro is an American artist, writer, and activist based in Valencia, Spain, and here? Spain. In Spain. She is editor-at-large for the Don't Delete Art campaign, which she'll tell you about, and the founder of the international art project and movement Exposure Therapy. She holds a degree from Rhode Island School of Design and has received many, many fellowships, awards, and residency opportunities. And I think she's the perfect person to moderate the panel today, which will be focusing on the control of speech by social media, Meta, and online platforms. And I just wanted to say to you, I take this platform very seriously since I was knocked off of Facebook permanently for posting a video by a Chinese artist that had been shown in a New York museum, but somehow not the most radical museum, mind you, but it was too much for Facebook. They've allowed me to continue on Instagram, thank God. So please enjoy.
Thank you. Everybody can hear me? Okay. Hi, everybody. Thank you for being here. This is Don't Delete Art, is social media beyond our control. And thank you so much to the Artists at Risk Connection and Art at a Time Like This for bringing us here to do this panel and for having a particular focus on this very important problem that is very often overlooked within our own art community and beyond. We're going to have a really interesting conversation. We have a very interesting set of voices here. We have artist Sibila Sotomayor Van Rysseghem, sorry, I know I'm pronouncing that wrong, Jenin Yaseen, and Elizabeth Larison from the National Coalition Against Censorship. As you all have heard, my name is Emma Shapiro. I am a visual artist, I'm an arts writer, and I'm the editor-at-large for Don't Delete Art. Don't Delete Art is a collaboration between human rights organizations, the National Coalition Against Censorship, Artists at Risk Connection, Free Muse, and other artist activists like myself. What we do is we advocate for visual artists that are facing censorship online, and we educate our community on the current state of that censorship. So to kick us off, I'd like to say that some of you in the audience, you might have experience with online art censorship. And if that is the case, then you are familiar with the feelings of frustration and anxiety that come with that experience. But many of you may have never experienced online art censorship. And to those of you, I would like to attest, as somebody who has, at the hands of social media platforms, content moderation, experienced this, it is indeed very frustrating, very anxiety-inducing, and very isolating. But the real heart of the problem is this. It's that artists depend on internet platforms and social media. Over the last decade, artists have increasingly used these tools like social media and online platforms to access audiences and opportunities that previously were completely out of their grasp. It's become a critical tool for artists to disseminate their work and make connections and to find opportunities. And it is particularly true for the most marginalized artists in our community, such as women artists, LGBTQ artists, disabled artists, artists living under political regimes, and other marginalized groups. So the internet was this dream of connectivity. And though, as we all know now, it's become a lot more complicated than that. And for some, it has become even quite dangerous. The reality is that while it is a necessary tool, it should be available to all artists equally to succeed. Much of the censorship, harassment, and threats that lead to physical danger begin and happen online. So these events of censorship can originate from within the platforms themselves, either through the way content moderation is designed, or even from the online community itself, or it can come at the direction and encouragement of governments who want to target artists who are dissidents or outside of their political ideology. So artists all over the world have experienced their governments wielding this power of social media against them or pressuring them into self-censorship at the risk of persecution. We've witnessed this in numerous countries all over the world for years now, and increasingly recently as well, including in Cuba, Russia, Brazil, Iran, Pakistan, India, Chile, which Sibila will speak to. And this is all increasingly complicated because national law supersedes platform governance. And now with the rise of a lot of authoritarian regimes and partisan politics, they're more apt to be targeting artists and other creators who don't follow what they believe. So in our panel today, we'll be exploring the duality of the digital space that has changed the art world in so many ways. It is both critically important and beneficial to artists, and it is the doorway to increased persecution and danger for many. It's really quite a double-edged sword. So, thank you for your attention for my little prologue. I'm now going to turn to our panelists with a question for each of them. Then we're going to have some general questions and discussion, and then we're going to go to a question and answer and some final thoughts, okay? So, first, I'm going to have a sip of water. Okay. All right, so our first question is for Sibila. So, Sibila, you're a member of lots of places. And you went viral in 2019 with your performance Un violador en tu camino, a rapist in your path. This piece condemned police violence and institutional violence against women. This performance quickly became an anthem of women's rights and was subsequently performed in many countries around the world, including here in New York City outside Harvey Weinstein's trial. The spread of this piece of performance art is due largely to social media, but along with this viral success came harassment, intimidation, and danger that originated on social media. In your case, the Chilean police sued you, LASTESIS, accusing you of inciting violence against them and using hate speech. Although these charges were later dropped, you experienced harassment and intimidation online that was allowed and encouraged by Chilean authorities. So, I would like to ask you, could you please explain a bit about the role that social media played in the organization and diffusion of the performance and the subsequent events?
Hola, hi, oh, sorry. Yes, for us as a collective, when we start working, we were a very underground collective that combines art with activism. This is a very important thing to notice, the fact that we identified ourselves as artists, but also as activists, like we use tools from the arts and from performing arts for doing feminist activism in particular. But we come from not such a big city. We don't live in the capital of the country. We live in Valparaiso. And we were moving in a way not mainstream area, place of action, the opposite. And it's in that context, been working already for a few years, what we try to do is to spread feminist ideas, but also feminist demands, combined with feminist theories, etc. In that moment, in 2019, we were living this big political uprising, this big revolution, where in one point in the beginning it was like, what does art have to do in this? You know, like when people are actually being killed or are actually being shot in their eyes and being attacked, being sexually attacked also by the police, like what can art do regarding this? So for us, it was in that context that we took the decision to do a street performance to denounce specifically the sexual political violence from the police in Chile that they were perpetrating mostly to women, but also to queer people. And that's where social media comes. Because since we were a very underground collective, like I mentioned, social media was the way, like our Instagram account, our way to spread the word, make an open call and say everyone who identify as a woman or a person from the LGBTQAI+ community can come and participate in this street performance. That's very simple. It's a very simple choreography, some lyrics that we're going to be reading, and we're going to have one rehearsal of 1 hour, and then we just go and do the street intervention. And all that we did it through social media. Like that was our way to make this open call. So, of course, many friends came, but also some people that we didn't know, and we just got around, rehearsed, did the action, and that's all, you know, like performance. The idea was this is something that happens one time only, that's going to interrupt the everyday life, you could say, of people just passing by the street, but in this context of this very big and violent, also because of the violent response of the police, political uprising. And then again, social media. We didn't intend for this performance to go viral or to be replicated by someone else or other collectives. It happened because some people start recording it and sharing it in their own social media, and suddenly there was many people from different places of Chile writing to us like, we want to do this performance here, we want to do this performance there, and we were like, okay, go for it. Like, we're going to do it again also in Santiago, that is 1 hour and a half from Valparaiso, also with an open call through social media. And that's the one you could say that then went like more globally kind of viral, and then we start receiving messages from people all around the world through social media, like we want to do this performance here. So we decided to make this open call everywhere you are, you know, to whoever needs actually to take this form of action, this performance as a tool for fighting and for resistance in their different contexts. Because for us it was very important that it's not only about replicating a performance, it's about how people can actually reappropriate this as a tool of resistance. So of course it changed, the lyrics changed, the choreography changed, the wardrobe changed, because it was intended to. But for us, it never was intended to, you know? It was only one action of one time happening in Valparaiso, and that's all. So, of course, the social media was actually the channel through this performance travel. And actually, it's still like, la palabra, reverberando. Like it's still moving, through the network and getting to people. And until this day, we see collectives of women and queer people through social media, we see it, like doing the performance in different contexts. For example, now with supporting the resistance of the Palestinian people, for example, so we can see how that performance is not ours, as a collective, like we are not the owners of it. It's actually something that maybe we created, but every time that someone else take it into action in the different contexts, is their own too, and that's a way how, through actually social media, even if we didn't intend it, this network, like this feminist underground network is created and exists. But like Emma mentioned, of course, that's like the more pretty side of it, and there's of course a very more dark side of it, but I will talk that later, I think.
Yeah, we'll discuss some more of that. You'll enlighten us. This next question is for Jenin. So, Jenin, you are a Palestinian-American artist, and you've used your art and your voice as an artist to advocate for human rights, and specifically Palestinian rights. The topic of Palestine has long been censored and very difficult for artists to discuss on social media, particularly in the United States, something which was reported on this year by the Human Rights Watch in specific. So I wanted to know, could you unpack the event of your censorship by the Royal Ontario Museum, that's what it is called, right? And explain how social media played a role in sharing and discussions about that event of censorship. And did you feel or face any difficulty in how you were able to discuss this event of censorship online?
Hey everyone, salam. I'm really excited to be in community with you all today, especially in discussion with this, just because censorship in general is interconnected with how the world sees things. And as a Palestinian artist, I've always come to terms that I'm so limited into my opportunities because I am unapologetically Palestinian. And because the reality is I follow the culture of Palestinian art. And to us, art is truth. Art connects us to one another. And that is exactly how I practice it. And it was seen as such a threat to the Royal Ontario Museum in general. Just a quick review. I was so honored to get an opportunity at the Field Museum to create a piece of art for the death exhibit. And I did it last year in April, and it was great. It was perceived by the public. I worked with other Palestinian colleagues. I'm a member of the Palestinian Feminist Collective, and so were they, and they advocated for the museum to offer me that opportunity. To me, it was a life-changing opportunity, because I had no idea I would ever come that way as an artist. The death exhibit was a traveling exhibit, and the first stop was Toronto, the Royal Ontario Museum. And the reality of being Palestinian kind of hit again there. In this specific piece, I conveyed the practice of Muslims specifically. For us, burial practice has been done for thousands of years. But to me, it was really important to convey that sacred burial practice as a Muslim is so limited because of the occupation. Oftentimes, through the occupation, they actually capture Palestinian bodies as hostages to prevent from it being buried right away, to prevent us from practicing like Islam, to also like humiliate us, because even in death, we are prisoners to the occupation essentially. And so in a small part of the painting, I conveyed that through symbols. In Palestinian culture, we have something called tatriz, which is Palestinian cross-stitch, and I embroidered a piece that symbolized graves, and then a shadow of a Palestinian being pulled out of the grave by silhouettes of soldiers. The Royal Ontario Museum would not display my piece of art unless I give them consent to erase that portion of the painting, and I refused. There was also another display where they wanted to remove the word Palestinian. They wanted to replace the word exile. They wanted to remove a name of a Palestinian village called Turmusaiya. When we went to the Royal Ontario Museum, we did not see our displays in the exhibit. We were invited to the opening way before October, and I watched the curator applaud the artists that were a part of the death exhibit. Meanwhile, they refused to put my art. And when I confronted the curator, he said, "What art? It's not art. It's a reproduction of a painting. That's different." That was an extremely violent, and not to mention that this was a death exhibit. And during October, we were mourning 8,000 lives. We were watching Palestinian bodies being blown up to pieces, trapped in rubble, preventing them from practicing the practice that I had conveyed in the painting. Part of being Palestinian is this idea of humiliation, how we are humiliated in death and in life, and I felt humiliated again in that moment. And I refused to leave that museum along with my colleague Samira Hussam. We stayed at the museum overnight in negotiations with the museum, and they eventually allowed my painting to be reproduction of my painting or my art to be in displays as is, but they placed a disclaimer that encouraged people to walk past. It said something like, if you are uncomfortable with conflict, please pass by this display. The idea of censorship as a Palestinian is a reality. I know that it exists. I know that I am limited in my opportunity. But being at the museum overnight, I had thought a lot about it. I come from a family of artists. My cousin is actually a very famous artist in Palestine, where he paints on cactuses, or Palestinian cactuses that we call sabr. And I realized that the world is so threatened by our art because it's proof that we exist. And the genocide, the escalating genocide that we are seeing right now is a reality of how there are specific powers in place meant to justify such a massacre by denying our existence, by humiliating us, by trying to dehumanize us as much as possible. But art humanizes us. Art connects us, not only for non-Palestinians, but as Palestinians, because we have been forcibly separated, not only from our homeland, but from each other. We have Palestinians in the West, we have Palestinian refugee camps in Lebanon, we have Palestinians in Europe. We may not practice our mother tongue, but a symbol in our culture connects us. It reminds us where our home is. It reminds us what we're fighting for. And so, I hope that answered your question, but censorship reality is connected to censorship online. They are intertwined, and as much as I will face censorship online, I will face it in real life as well.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Jenin. I'm going to move on to Elizabeth for her opening statement here. So, Elizabeth, as the director of the Arts and Culture Advocacy Program of the National Coalition Against Censorship and also a member of the Don't Delete Art team, how do you understand online art censorship, and why is it something that the National Coalition Against Censorship is concerned about?
Thanks, Emma. In talking about art censorship online, I think it's important to talk very briefly first, more broadly, about plain old censorship online. As you mentioned, Emma, in your opening comments, the promise of the internet being a new way for people to connect to each other was very much at the core of its beginning. And we saw that, with websites and email and people connecting to each other. But then, of course, there's social media. Early blog websites kind of gave this new opportunity to not just exchange, but to find massive audiences. And that is so important, particularly for not just creators, but creators who don't have name recognition, who don't have gallery representation, early stage, early career artists, and so on and so forth. So being able to have that sort of direct connection to an audience was so clearly important. But all of these venues, these forums for these exchanges, social media platforms, they're privately owned, which means they are privately owned by private entities which have a legal right to censor as they wish within their platforms through content moderation. Content moderation happening through terms and conditions, rules through which one can engage on the platforms, and more specifically how that's wielded not just by AI in terms of AI reading the content, but algorithmic ranking. So these are all a type of censorship which is already embedded within the realm of the internet to begin with. But I want to be really clear. That censorship is within the rights and beneficial, like it benefits the corporations as well as the users, which we know through experience with the internet. If we don't have any type of content moderation, it's just going to be one constant feed of who posted what most recently. No two people are probably going to see the same thing in a lot of cases, and at best, a very generous description might be most people would find it irrelevant. But of course, there's so much more that they might not want to see, or they might not be interested in, right? So I know this might sound weird coming from somebody who works at an anti-censorship organization, but there's some level of censorship that happens and benefits everybody who uses the internet. So now that I've sort of laid bare that, why do we care about art censorship in these spaces? There are a lot of big reasons for that. One is that social media corporations, the people who use these platforms, as well as artists, all benefit from the exchange and the availability of art on these platforms. Social media companies love to talk about how much they love artists, how much they are there for creators, all the things that they offer, all that we gain from being able to access art. And of course, artists, the art world, art market, all greatly benefit from social media. I'll talk more about that in just a moment. But despite all this, we see routinely art that is in museum spaces, accessible by general audiences, and art that is not dissimilar from that which you can see in museums is routinely downranked and sort of framed as inappropriate. And it might result in account deletion, though we see that less and less these days. It might result in artwork removal or downranking, which also has been referred to as shadow banning in the past, though now it's a little bit less shadowy. This is when content meets the terms and conditions to exist on the platform, but is still labeled as sort of iffy, so that it gets sort of just hidden by a poster's from a poster's community and people who don't even follow them yet. We're also concerned because art censorship online not only has a drastically negative effect on working artists, but it threatens diversity within the cultural field. I don't know, I'm sure since we're at a commercial gallery or fair, many people might be familiar with Artsy and how they have these annual gallery or they used to be called gallery insight reports, and now I think they're called industry insight reports, but they look at the field and how it's influenced by a lot of different factors, and they almost always have a section now which talks about the impact of social media on the field. And in 2020, they included, the report that reflected on the year of 2020, so I think it came out in 2021, they found that among the gallerists that they interviewed, that social media had surpassed art fairs as a way to get art out in the world and to sell art. That's not surprising, it was during COVID. But the influence and the impact of the importance of social media has remained, and I have to look at my sheet here to give you the correct information, but as recent as the 2023 report, social media remains a key advertising and outreach channel for galleries and artists, and especially younger galleries and younger artists. And this next one is really shocking to me, but in 2023, they found that commercial galleries rely on social media. It's the second most important way that they find new artists. The first most common way they find new artists is through other artists, but the second one is Instagram. So when you think about what gets seen and what gets shared in these spaces, that has a drastic impact, not just on the artist's visibility, but their economic viability and their career potential. That's sort of not what you would expect, because social media is not art-centric. It is a commercial entity. It's an online. I'm missing my words, but it's technology. The creators of Instagram, the creators of social media are not out there thinking about artistic context. Additionally, of course, it also thwarts artistic expression, as I mentioned, and particularly because it doesn't incorporate this idea of artistic context. Today, if you talk to artists, particularly any artists who work in themes of gender, sexuality, the body, politics, responding to themes of discrimination or historical disenfranchisement, it's not uncommon for you to learn that many of them have bumped up against these content moderation guidelines that restrict the circulation of their art. The result of this is that it can influence artists in determining what they decide to make, what is worth their time. Is it worth putting time into art that will not only not be seen, but that might threaten your visibility online? And it also might inevitably influence what they post. Maybe they make art, but maybe they never share it. So the fact that an online platform is influencing and in some cases dictating whether and how artists are found by curators, by galleries, it stands to shape the entire field at large. Again, an entire entity that never intended to influence, say, art and culture the way that it has a huge effect on the field at large. And that's why we care about speaking out against art censorship online.
Thank you so much, Elizabeth. Yes, absolutely. Okay, well, before we get into some more general questions, I would like to turn back to you, Sibila, now after we've talked about a few different ways that censorship is present on the platforms and in real life, social media is real life. I would like for you to expound a bit on what happened next after the viral success of Un Violador en Tu Camino.
Sí, this is the not so fun part of it. Because with us, it wasn't that actually our work was censored by the social media. Like, we have never had that kind of issue. Like, when we met earlier through Zoom and we're talking about it, it was like, actually, even if we are like feminist activists and we are talking about difficult stuff and blah, 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 we are not like directly censored, you know? It only happened one time when one video performance that we made, it was also a collaborative video performance during the pandemic regarding the right to abortion, but because there was nudity in the video. So YouTube and Instagram was like, nah. So we went to Vimeo and it's on Vimeo. You can see it there. It's called Juntas Abortamos. Together we abort. And yes, very simple. Like, together, what we do together, abort. So yeah, it's illegal in Chile. So it's a very big fight that we have. It's present in all our work. I laugh about it, but it's a serious matter. But that's the only experience like of direct censorship that we lived, actually. The other ones wasn't very much like that, but actually it's this relationship with like real life and social media where we could see like how it became, like social media works as an instrument to being persecuted then as artists and as activists by the police, but also by the government, but also by politicians, etc. Emma was mentioning earlier that we as a collective, LASTESIS, were denounced by the police by 2 charges. Actually, it wasn't that they dropped the charges, it was actually that the prosecutor, I think you said, failed in favor of us and told them, like, you can never again denounce them in those charges, like never again. So it's like we won, okay. Yay, but all that process happened because, and we actually confirmed it when we saw the document, like the document of the police, when they filed the denunciation from the police, the one like the prosecutor has, you know. I think it's correct, fiscal is prosecutor, like the person, yeah, it's okay, thank you. Sorry. And we could see like from where the evidence came, because it was recorded a video where we said, fuego a la yuta, that means like fire to the police. But actually it was a video that we didn't intend to go online. It was a little mistake that Al Jazeera, the media, you know, platform, AG+, you know, they posted it because they made a little mistake. They thought that was the final video because it was a collaboration that we made with Pussy Riot, and actually it was not the final one because we cut that part because Pussy Riot asked us to cut it to not have troubles in the country, and we ended up having troubles. So the video was online like 2 hours only because we realized, and we write to them, and it was like, you have to take it down because this is difficult for us. Like it can translate into something like dangerous for us. And in those 2 hours, like it was online, I don't know, like the first hour, one politician from the extreme right of Chile called José Antonio Cast. He's actually the presidential candidate. It was in the last election. He's going to be in the next election too. He's a very dangerous man. He was actually the one who posted on Twitter, in that time it was still called Twitter, our video. And that part where we said Fuego a la Yuta. And we didn't even knew the video was online. We found out because some people started talking to us, hey, this video is online, like he posted it. And we were like, I'm pretty sure this man of like 60-ish is like online all day seeing if someone is posting something about us, about a collective of 4 people from Valparaiso. Like, no. This means there's a team of people, like looking for stuff, like to really trying to, like saying these people are, because they use that word in Chile, terrorists in the end. They are telling that the police have to be like burned. And that actually what happened in social media because of this man translating into this persecution through the law from the police, like the institution of the police. It wasn't like a person making the denunciation against us. It was like the police of Chile, like against us, like 4 professor, artists, like. But also then they gained the support of the government. Like the government never talked about many police violences that happened during this political uprising. But when suddenly the police was making this denouncement against 4 artists, it was like the government was also talking about it, And everything was because of social media, again. And of course, that's one case, but that's also translated into this denunciation, but also they infiltrated in actions that we make calls to do it. They also start, for more than 1 year, we have like drones, like around our home, like, yes, they really like deployed, I think you say, like all this system of persecution. And it's crazy because even if you're not being like censored, then you are being censored. Because you're asking yourself, like every word that you're saying, like every word that you put in on even in a post, in a story on Instagram, like we had to be so careful. Like our lawyers were like, you can't talk about fire anymore. Feminists, we use a lot fire as a metaphor for everything and not so much a metaphor too. So it was very difficult. Like we had to find strategies to keep talking about this issue, but without being put on risk, that we were already at risk, actually, like a very concrete risk. And also, of course, then there's all this hate online that's still happening until this day, like receiving messages all the time that I hope you get raped, I hope you die. Like, because since we are denouncing rape, it's like, you don't like that, I hope you get it, It's like that. So that's what was from day one, but it's always like that. Like we discussed it, like when you are visible as an artist / activist in this case, like people are always going to be expecting things from you. Like if you say something, they're going to criticize you. If you don't say something, also they're going to criticize you. So it's something that is always there. Like social media actually for us is a tool, but for us, I think it's more a place where we are more anxious about the response every time that we're going to share something like that. It's like we have to be prepared for all the backlash of constant hate. But also in the end is, this double thing, this duality is also the only media that we have to be able to take this denouncement into more people.
Thank you. Thank you. It is, utterly fascinating, the way that all that has played out. Yeah, and it's perfect because I would like to talk a bit more about self-censorship, right? So what happens then next? And Elizabeth talked a bit about how when artists censored online, when it happens to you as an artist online, it happens just to you and your phone, and your artwork's gone, right? And who do you turn to? How do you respond? And in many cases, you will decide, okay, well, I'm not going to share work like that again, or I'm going to change my practice, right? And in your case, you're saying that you have to now consider and really think about the next move you make as an artist because of the visibility you're getting online, right? And the kind of reaction you get. And so I would like to I want to know a bit more about how you deal with this self-censorship, how you think about self-censorship. Do you consider how an art practice changes after an event of censorship? What do you think about that? Jenin, what happened for you artistically after that event in Ontario?
So before the Ontario Museum experience, I was always like, I am unapologetically Palestinian. In our culture, we are unapologetic for who we are. In our culture, art is such a significant part of what we consider resilience, what connects us together, and we cannot like water that down. But during the Ontario Museum, I reflected a lot on that question. Around 10:30 p.m., one of the representatives came, and this was kind of her last straw with us, last negotiation practice before we stayed overnight. She said, what if we commission you? What if we commission you and you create something else and it's just about Islamic burial practice? You don't mention Palestine at all. And in the moment, I was like, absolutely not. No, I'm not doing that, you know? And she was like, but the times are different. It's just a little bit more controversial now. And in reality, like, we've always been getting killed. It's just now we're getting killed at a rate that's really uncomfortable for people. So I was like, no, we're not. She's like, but this, the way you portrayed this, incited hate and all that. And then she just gave up and left, and we stayed overnight. And I remember that one moment where it was just absolutely freezing, and I was tired. And all I could think about was that question, what if we commission you? And of course, I was not willing to recreate another piece, but I was scared that they were going to try to commission someone else for another piece. And it made me reflect on how these institutions, these museums, these galleries view me as a Palestinian Muslim artist. They view me as a minority, as this check mark for inclusivity, as this, you know, something that they could advertise to talk about how great they are, and what the repercussions would be if someone were to have taken the opportunity on me and on my people, especially in this current moment. How if an artist would have taken that opportunity, they would have censored me, and they would have normalized that type of censorship and that type of treatment. And I think that's something that's like super important to like consider, how as artists we treat each other as well, and how we kind of unintentionally censor each other for these huge opportunities.
Do you think that, because you got coverage when that happened, right? The art newspaper wrote an article about it, and I believe there was chatter online about what happened to you and how you stood up for yourself and your artwork. Do you think that, have you heard from any artists online about maybe that empowered them, or similar events that happened to them, either online or in person? I mean, did this galvanize anything for you?
I think since October, a lot of artists have been censored for even just speaking up on Palestine, and there has been cultivated this type of fear. Should we make solidarity work? Should we not? Should we speak out? Should we not? And I think social media was really great during the time when we were doing that sit-in, that people knew that this was going on. And I think potentially it could have like empowered other folks to take that extra step to understand the realities of like what it means to be an artist, especially in this current moment. Mm-hmm. But I don't know if anyone necessarily was empowered by that specific, but I know that there have been so many artists trying to resist this very same thing in terms of like what it means to either be Palestinian or just speak up on Palestine.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. I'd like to talk a little bit also now about art institutions. So as you know, you're discussing how they reacted to this and how they tried to navigate the situation themselves. And I would say at this point, most institutions probably, you know, they put themselves forward as wanting to support minority artists or to be on the right side of history, right? And often they fail in that endeavor, and especially when it comes to, say, what artists are experiencing online when they do experience censorship online or harassment online even. lot of institutions have become silent in the face of that. They haven't spoken out. We only hear about it really when it happens to them, right? When it happened in Vienna or it's happened at the Met. We hear them get angry, but they don't talk about it when it happens to the other artists that are working in the field or the artists that a gallery represents. So if art world institutions, if they intend to foster this diversity and representation, how could they use their power to advocate for the artists who are losing visibility online, who are facing censorship? What should they be doing? Elizabeth, you? Oh, sure, it's for generally, but I think you could say something.
Yeah, absolutely. I think because of the atomization or the siloization in which artists are often censored online, as we mentioned, they feel isolated, they feel alone, it feels like it's just happening to you, and if you say anything, it's like you're shouting into the void. And also, the way social media algorithms work, it's like a black box. They don't report on how many artists they censored or what percentage of their shadow ban or their down ranking affects artists, even though, who knows if they keep statistics on that, but I tell you, they know a lot about me, so they probably know that I'm into art, right, or that I'm making art. Anyway, there's no way to track that. So one thing that we do, Emma and I and our other colleagues at Don't Delete Art, is we created something called the Don't Delete Art Manifesto. And I'm bringing that up, I hope that's okay, Emma, because I see, in the question of what is there to do, I feel like institutions at the very least should be, and people who are in the cultural field who stand to build their profession in one way or another off of artists, who rely on artists to make work and to keep producing work in order to have their museums or their galleries, they are the ones who should also be speaking up on behalf of artists, so that's not always, the burden isn't always placed only on the creator. And so I mentioned the manifesto because I believe that we need these big institutional stakeholders, academic institutions, not the art newspaper per se, because I believe they actually already signed on to the manifesto, but we need arts publications, not just journalism, arts journalism, critics. We need museums, we need galleries to also put the pressure on these social media institutions to have something in their algorithms that understands artistic context, because that is where there is a huge failure on these companies, which is why we're seeing this. But just like you mentioned, Emma, like the institutions, in a way, I feel like it doesn't, like that sort of advocacy they see it as outside of themselves. They see their work as presenting programming. They see their work as, paying and employing artists and presenting ways to show their work, but they don't think about the larger ecosystem, which is shaping the culture, which is, in a way, feeding it to them and their employees as well. So, yeah, I think that's all I had on mind for that, but does that answer your question? Is there something else?
Sure,
okay.
That's wonderful.
Yeah.
Do either of you have anything that you think that art institutions should be doing or doing better when it comes to protecting artists?
Yeah, I mean, 100%. I feel like one of the only reasons I got the opportunity to be a part of the death exhibit was because of the Field Museum's lack of interest in showcasing Muslim perspectives in death. And after the Field Museum, launched their death exhibit, they were pressured by community to add a component of Muslim, because why aren't you doing that? Muslims have had for thousands of years done green burials. That should be portrayed. This is supposed to be part of the exhibit. How did you forget Muslims? You added Christianity, you added Hinduism, you added Judaism, but you didn't add Muslims. And so the Field Museum, and kind of trying to, fill in those needs of these calls, kind of were last minute, trying to reach out to a lot of artists, trying to reach out to community. Well, do you know any artists willing to produce anything? And that's how they ended up finding me, and I had to create a piece within a month, basically. And I was more than happy to do it. I had never had such a huge opportunity like this before. But if these institutions, I feel like they should have this responsibility to go into these communities, to understand these communities, to know these artists themselves, Because I feel like for me at least, I had given up a little bit in terms of social media, as you mentioned before, kind of this idea of like anxiety. I've posted paintings before, especially in July 2021. I'm from Asira Shamali and Nablus, and it was declared one of the first villages to be under illegal annexation. And so I watched like my family members protest, occupation soldiers, and get pepper sprayed and get beaten up and get arrested. And in rage, I created this piece and I posted it. And when people posted that piece, it was just blank. No one would actually see it. And if on Instagram, you can see kind of like the stories that you posted. And if you look in your Instagram stories, it would just be a block of black. And that did not only like in relation to my specific piece, but anytime you spoke about Sheikh Jarrah or any of the Palestinian villages, you would see just like that black box, right? So you couldn't even go to your Instagram stories to see that type of content. Needless to say, for me, that's when I started viewing art as a part of community. You know what? Like, I'm not gonna post as much on social media. I'm gonna create things, but I'm gonna embed it into my community. See where their needs are. Go to organizing circles. Can I create this for a zine? You know, do you wanna create an art activity, right? Do you wanna create an art event? And that's kind of where I felt like I thrived in, because community saw me, they appreciated me, they recognized me. And I think these institutions should invest more in these communities, participate in these art events, get to know these artists that are doing a lot of work on a local level, and amplify them and give them that form of recognition that they really deserve. And after I did the overnight sit-in at the Royal Antoria Museum, I think me and the other Palestinians that had done the displays were like talking like, well, what do we do? This is a traveling exhibit. It's gonna go to other museums. It's gonna go to other parts of Canada. It's gonna go to other parts of America. It might even go to Europe. What happens if we're constantly being censored? What is that gonna look like? Are we going to have to continue posting on social media and having to like put a lot of labor into pressuring these museums to just display our work? It just seems just like insane and unfair and just, yeah, it's just very unfair and humiliating, to be honest. And so, like, why won't, like, we did reach out to the Field Museum and ask them, like, why can't you build these contracts to protect us? We don't want to do this again. We don't want to be in this position again. And we have yet to hear from the Field Museum on that.
Go ahead, Sibila.
I just wanted to add that I think some institutions, at least not all, sometimes don't realize how much power actually they can have to protect the work and the lives of people who decide to do activism through art. Like, of course, it's not the same if you're doing your actions and completely like disconnected to these platforms, because that actually in some countries like mine and other countries of Latin America and other countries of the world can translate in that you can be even killed, you know. That's actually something that happens. Like in our country, people are killed because of their activism. So of course that when you have the support of some institutions like that give visibility and like endorse your work, it's going to also protect your life. For us, we have always say like, probably if our performance didn't went like viral in that way and suddenly had so much support, like not from institutions, but from people from different places, maybe we will not be here, you know. It will be much easier because where we live is something that happens. Like visibility is also your protection of your life. And I think that's something that sometimes some institutions don't realize, that it's not only about giving you money to do some work. It's actually about like protecting you, maybe if this can go very wrong too, because when you're addressing issues like this, it's complicated. But also there's of course this other side, that's something that as an artist, I think you're always questioning, like when the institution actually starts like making an extractivist action with your work, just like to, you know, have a clean conscience about it, and it's not really like committed with this. So it's a very thin line, I think, between when it can be actually a strength and when it can be actually a difficulty.
Mm-hmm.
Hi, I don't want to interrupt you because you're all so brilliant and this has been a wonderful discussion, but we want to bring the audience in. And we were wondering if anybody had any questions or comments. Yes?
I'm curious what activities are being done to influence the main players in the space, the Metas, the ByteDances, there aren't that many actually, now that you think about it. Because if you think about other parts of the creative ecosystem, for example, somewhere like Spotify, there's no direct path to Spotify. You can't post things on Spotify, you have to go through a distributor. And the distributor takes huge responsibility for the filtration of making sure that things are sort of appropriate for the medium. Other places don't have that, but there also seem to be side doors and back doors. For example, in the advertising ecosystem, there are aggregators that take part of that role. I'm curious if there have been any efforts to aggregate artists in a similar way to avoid the direct and maybe unnecessary censorship that could result.
Go ahead. That's a great question. Like, what can we do? What's out there? And it's an important question because it is so difficult to get through to these companies. So Don't Delete Art has done a couple of things over the years. I believe it was in 2020, before DDA even convened, the NCAC, the National Coalition Against Censorship, worked with another now DDA member named Spencer Tunick to create an art action. It was called We the Nipple. And Spencer Tunick, if you're not familiar with his work, he's a photographer. He often photographs usually like over 100 people at a time, all nude and sort of like different landscapes, outdoor kind of photographs. And so NCAC and Tunick convened, I think, 125 people outside of Meta's offices. They were all nude, and I believe they were all holding photographic cutouts of nipples. To make a statement about Meta's nipple policies. And it was following that action that NCAC and Tunick were able to lobby for a meeting with Meta and actually got artists in the room to start talking about these things. That was in 2020. NCAC and DDA have an ongoing relationship, or staff at Meta turns over quite a lot. That's an ongoing frustration and kind of confusion. There's still a lot of black boxiness with it. But we've had several meetings over the years outlining our concerns about lack of transparency, lack of artists' abilities to appeal. And I can't you never know how much of it is just our engagement, our pressure. But in December 22, we started seeing the appeals process in Instagram, where you can, it kind of undoes the shadowiness of the shadow ban, because you see now when your content will be downranked. You're told about it. That's progress. And then last year, I think it was last fall or last summer, we at DDA were part of, as I mentioned, this manifesto. We're trying to convene people to sign on to put their voice out there, people from the art world specifically, because those are the stakeholders. Those are the people who can say, like, we know that there are things which can be used to identify art. What is artistic context? That's not for us to totally dictate, but we can certainly influence these tech companies who are inadvertently, intentionally or not, standing to shape the culture at large. So it's a part of an ongoing project. And also, if I can just add on with Don't Delete Art, one of the things that we do is we try to make visible art which is constantly taken down or downranked. So we have an online gallery of art censored online as a document to show what is being downranked, what is being hidden. And if you look through, it's not so dissimilar from what you might see at a contemporary art museum. And so we really need to, as an artistic community, need to put the pressure on these institutions, because otherwise they stand to sort of inadvertently shape the cultural field at large.
Thank you. Very good.
Hello, thank you so much. I want to address one aspect of social media. I think Instagram in particular is a mental disease, and honestly, sometimes I have to delete myself just for my mental health's sake. And at what cost, right? Because otherwise my art won't be there. If I'm in art fair, hey, do you have Instagram? No, I'm taking a mental health break. Or, you know, like, what is the... And I wonder if that is also a statement, not having an Instagram, but then it's with the price of not being able to show, and with the absence of other kind of platforms that showcase artists' work. Thank you.
Not talking personally, but as a collective, for us, of course, I agree with you that is a platform that also gives a lot of anxiety. Like, it has this side that is not a nice one, you could say. It's not something that gives you joy. And as a collective, because of all this backlash of violence that we received and are still receiving through social media, of course, sometimes it's like, you know, it will be so much easier to just like shut it down and like forget about this and stop doing this. But in our case, it's not our personal account, it's like the collective's account. So in that case, I think it's different, because it's when you identify as a feminist and also an activist, what you're trying to do and have is a place of enunciation, you know, a platform where you can also actually address issues that for you are so urgent and are actually like life or death matters, you know? So for us, of course, it's not only Instagram. Like, it's not only that. Like, all the actions that we do, I think it's everything that we do is outside social media. Like, social media is like an archive, you could say, of what we're doing, and trying to also use it if we need to make an open call and stuff like that, and just to have information moving, and not only about our work, but also about like gender violence in a country generally. But it's still one little part that actually translate into a tool for these in real life actions that when we take outside the platform. So for us, when we had that discussion, like, we will be so much happier if we don't have this Instagram account, you know, like receiving all these terrible comments all the time, like, for sure, we will be happier people. But what we do, like, what we have decided to do is to address issues so urgent that we don't have the privilege, actually, to just say, shut it down, like, we can't do it. Because for us, like, in our context, we think it is a privilege. Like, every place that we can be, like, every invitation that we get, and even if we're not invited to one place or a platform, like, we just take it. Like, every place that we have to take it. Like, we have to be there, even if it's so exhausting sometimes. But I think it's very different, that from a more personal, maybe, point of view, like you mentioned, you know, I think it's other stuff going on in that decision. Yeah.
But Jenin would like to add something to that.
Yeah, so I just want to add that the reason for me, at least, what produced anxiety from Instagram was what was normalized as an artist to post. You needed to post these reels that showed the piece step by step. You needed to post consistently. You needed to post for the sake of production and not for the sake of like yourself and what you wanted to reproduce. And to me, like, it was really important for me to resist that and post on my time. So maybe I'd post and then I'd just disappear for a year and then I'd post again. But that is like that gave me power and empowered me, that I'm not going to go out of my way to study the algorithm that's going to change and with every update or so forth.
Yeah, it's a good point. It all gets commodified and you have to keep up with it, and it's very, I mean, it has gotten to be pretty intense. Is there a last question?
Yeah, I wanted to ask about a very specific part of the censorship conversation, which is about like drawing the line between something that can appear as pornography versus something that is art and like an artistic representation of identity and sexuality and gender. Mm-hmm. I know it's only just one part of it, but that's the biggest thing on my brain, is like celebrating people's bodies is a big part of art. Exploring who I am as, you know, an artist is a big part of art. How are you guys seeing that conversation show up, and it's probably a bit more of a delicate one in terms of like the line is pretty harshly drawn. Is there anything that like you can offer as an insight into just how the censorship of our bodies is kind of evolving as the larger censorship conversation goes on?
Could I start that conversation? Well, I'd say with Don't Delete Art, the majority of censorship reports that we get from artists are artists who are using the body, right? I mean, nudity online is a big censorship factor when it comes to Instagram, and and especially female presenting bodies, because female nipples are not allowed on Instagram, and that itself has kicked off a whole movement and conversation. I mean, the Free the Nipple movement gained its first and most impressive momentum through social media, and the hashtag Free the Nipple is still a hidden hashtag on Instagram, even though it is a global movement, right? And that's a movement that I really care about personally and as an artist, because it exemplifies this very particular issue of like sexualizing bodies, right? And with Don't Delete Art, and a lot of the cases that we get, and all the groups that we talk to and people who contact us, we see this like Venn diagram, all these interconnections between a bunch of all different kinds of like body equality groups and other groups that are using the body to express something, not even just visual art, even like bodily health, women's health issues, all kinds of things that are facing the same censorship for like presumably the same reasons, right? But like because the body is sexualized. And with Don't Delete Art, and Elizabeth can speak to this, I think, a little bit more eloquently than I can, about how it is a tricky line that we are constantly trying to figure out how best to advocate for artists that is as inclusive as possible for the modes of expression, but also in the way that we can be most effective with the broader art community as well, and with these companies, and to make our point the best, right? So do you have anything to add to that?
Yeah, I do. I think I just want to point out that in the beginning of Don't Delete Art's days, which was, I think it was founded in 2021 or 2020, before I became involved, people were getting their accounts deleted. People were getting posts removed, and there's one in particular that comes to mind by a photographer named Ken Gruenholtz, and it's a black and white photograph of two men. They both have shirts off. They're both very muscular. They both have pants on. One is seated in a chair. One is kind of perched nearby, and like maybe he has his knee on the chair arm. Nothing untoward is happening in this photograph, but that was because of the distance, I think, at which the bodies are photographed. Maybe it's black and white, their pants are sort of light. I think that the algorithm thought that they were both nude, and it deleted the photo, if I'm not mistaken. But this was like what we were seeing 2 years ago, two men partially clothed taken down. We're seeing less of that now, and we're seeing more about the subtleties of restrictions. So it's a positive development, but there's still a lot more to be done and a lot further to go. But as a baseline way of thinking about it, I think it's always important to appeal. I think it's if there are frameworks that you work within, or that can contextualize your work as art, specifically rather than pornography, then that would be something to lean upon, like lean upon the lighting a little bit more, whatever, like, artistic modes of presentation. It's something that we don't have the silver bullet to give Meta to say, this is how you define erotic art versus pornography, commercial pornography versus a plain old nude. But that's not our job to tell them, but it's their job to consult with the artistic community to help define how they might create parameters to create a platform, a community that is mutually beneficial for both artists and people who want to see art.
I think that concludes this, though, the discussion obviously goes on and on. We created Dangerous Art, Endangered Artists as a campaign this year. We'll continue having programming starting in June at BRIC. What we like to say is that we want these discussions to produce dialogue, not divisiveness. And today was proof that that's achievable. And we have to thank everybody who's been in the audience for respecting each other and respecting the panelists. And thank you all for participating. And thank you, Anne Verhalen, Julie Trebald, Valentine Sargent, for making this all happen. And thank you, Independent.
Thank you.